Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining this LinkedIn Live on exploring clinical data and analytics, the trends shaping the market. We'll give everyone a couple of minutes so that they can join from their previous meetings. We are expecting a global audience today. So, for those of you who have joined us, let us know in the comments where you're joining from. Uh, so I think while we wait for people to join, Nisarg, you attended Scope last week. So in a few seconds, I'll invite you to share your perspectives on Scope. But for those in the audience, if you attended Scope, let us know who you think had the best booth at Scope. So Nisarg, over to you. Do you want to share some quick perspectives while we're waiting for people to join in?
Yeah, thanks, Chunky. So overall, it was a great conference, and I think there are two big challenges which the pharma industries are trying to solve for, right? One is the interoperability challenge, and the other is unlocking value from data. So what I've seen is that the product provider community is trying to innovate over here, try to accelerate time to insights through, say, low code, no code approaches, and then, of course, there is a focus on advanced analytics, giving access to the data which lies unlocked in the pharma ecosystem. I think the other is around DCTs. So there is a reset around expectations for DCTs too. But overall, I do see pharma companies trying to solve for scalability of DCTs in their ecosystem. And to some extent, DCT providers continue to focus on a higher bar of support so as to enable satisfaction or greater satisfaction for the DCTs. And then I think there's the new kid on the block, which is Gen AI. I had a lot of conversations around this, and I think I'll leave this for a later time in this LinkedIn Live so that we can unpack this further.
Thanks for sharing those perspectives, Nisarg. For those of you who just joined us, Nisarg was sharing his perspectives on Scope. Now, before we begin this session, I wanted to request everyone in the audience to please make it interactive. We would welcome your questions, we would welcome your perspectives, and as we go along, we'll be happy to address any questions or any perspectives that you share in the comments. The topic for today's session is exploring clinical data and analytics, the trends shaping the market. I am Chunky Satija, Vice President at Everest Group. I lead the healthcare and life sciences research practice. And I'll give you some quick context for why we are having this LinkedIn Live today. Right. So at the end of every year, we do an exercise where we analyze all of the questions that we receive from sponsors to look for common patterns and themes. And over the last couple of years, one of the common themes that we have seen is clinical data and analytics, and particularly platforms for clinical data and analytics. As you might already be aware, there's been an estimated 88% increase in the data that is collected from patients during clinical trials. From a sponsor perspective, there's a lot of focus on not only improving data quality, but also questions around how to make the most or best use of the data that they are collecting. So we'll discuss this in a little bit more detail in this LinkedIn Live. And to do that, I have two experts in this area. So I have Nisarg, who's a practice director at Everest Group, and he leads the clinical technology practice. Hi, Nisarg.
Hello, good morning, good evening.
And we have Madhur, who led the clinical data and analytics platforms assessment that we conducted in 2023. Hi, Madhur.
Hey, hi, Chunky. Hello, everyone.
Great. So we've talked about that the fact that there's a lot of activity from sponsors around clinical data and analytics, and particularly platforms in this space. So, Nisarg, a question to you: what are some of the challenges that you think sponsors are looking to address?
Sure. So I think this also ties back to the value propositions of a lot of the platform providers, right? You'll see that overall, the pharma clinical technology landscape is quite fragmented. There's a huge SaaS sprawl in their ecosystem, uh, various products across the clinical, regulatory, quality, safety value chains. So overall, what we've seen is there are huge data silos in their landscape, and therefore it leads to a fragmented ecosystem of stakeholders. leads to a fragmented ecosystem of data in itself, where there's no single source of truth for data, and therefore may lead to version correction errors and all those issues as well. So, and then ultimately, that all leads to fragmented insights as well. So, overall, the number one challenge which I believe pharma companies are trying to solve for are also how to give a single view of data and a single source of truth. And to some extent, we see platform providers focused on clinical data and analytics trying to address this top challenge over here. The other is with respect to the integration challenges. So, as I mentioned, because of the huge SaaS sprawl, there are various data sources which they may be looking to integrate with. And in their own manner, the data in itself is heterogeneous. So, how they can build custom solutions, accelerators, leads to higher costs. But such platforms really alleviate all those challenges and give a seamless experience of integrating various data sources into their own ecosystems itself. And then ultimately, it is about eliminating all the challenges around volume, velocity, veracity of data. So, how they can offer a low code, no code approach so that they don't really have to customize everything or create everything from scratch, but have existing templates, accelerators to really accelerate their time to study setup and get to clinical trial results faster.
That's interesting, right? So I think you mentioned a lot of challenges around data integration as well as visibility, right? I think that in my conversations, I think that is also one of the consistent themes. And I think you're right on low code, no code. I think there's a big focus on uh, not just analytics, but also making it easy to create those insights and also easy to consume those insights. I think which, and at least when I look at analytics within clinical trials, I think we're moving from what I would call first generation analytics, which was largely focused around data that you were gathering from a particular product and using that to do some basic analytics, to now, which is where we're taking data from multiple different products. And as you mentioned, Nisarg, the tech landscape is very fragmented. Uh, and and I think this is the transition that I'm seeing from first generation analytics to second generation analytics. Madhur, I think this is a space that you explored in more detail when you led the clinical data and analytics platforms assessment. Do you
Yeah.
want to talk about how you define what a clinical data and analytics platform should look like?
Sure, Chonki. So that's a very interesting question given the kind of challenges that Nisarg talked about. So the complexities of clinical data are increasing, and enterprises are looking for more of a holistic approach to clinical data analytics. And when they think of clinical data analytics, deploying it, implementing it across the clinical trial operations, they consider this from three broader aspects. So one is around your data integration part. So picture this as a platform that effortlessly brings together data from your EHR data sets or your lab data, your CTMS, and any other clinical data sources. What is important here is the interoperability part, which is very crucial, which allows for smooth flow of that information from different systems to create that unified experience, comprehensive data sets that can be then further used for downstream analysis. So imagine this like a superhero of your integration, making sure all your data sources play together. The next tenet to it is around data management. Now, once you have your data integrated from different clinical data sources, it's not just about collecting it, but it's about cleaning, transforming, and standardizing that data into a tip-top shape. So think of it as your a data butler, making sure everything is in order and ready for action. Here, what I think is your platform should perform all sort of data transformation, your handling operations, and that too in adherence to the kind of data standards that have been laid out. Say your CD standard or ADAM standard, which are essential to adhere to, because when you are submitting this data to say the regulatory bodies, say FDA, EMEA, all these standards are something which are very important. And lastly, once you have your data ready to use for further application, it's all about analytics and reporting. So once your data is all speak and span, it's time for that a magic to happen, right? The platform should be a kind of a wizard in analytics, applying all sorts of say tricks from right from your statistical sorcery to machine learning spells. So such a platform should support different use cases that are demanded by the enterprises when it comes to analytics. So there is a lot of data that is getting generated, collected, and stored in the system. Now, what enterprises are looking for is to generate insights from this data. So they want to understand the kind of deviations that have happened, the kind of anomalies that have been detected, or what has been the overall performance of your clinical trial, if I may. So, in a nutshell, I think a true clinical D&A platform is like a single place for most of your clinical industry needs. It brings together everything, gets in tip top shape, and then works its magic to give you insights that you need for your informed clinical decision making.
Thanks, Madhur. And for those of you who joined us for this LinkedIn Live, so the peak matrix assessment that Madhur led last year, we are offering a complimentary abstract of that. So if this is of interest to you, please do leverage that complimentary abstract. We all already have a few questions in the chat. So there's a question from Jay, and he asks, how do you balance privacy with clinical data analysis? Mr. Madhur, any of you want to take that up?
Here, I can take a first stab. So overall, I do see most of these platforms purpose built for one, privacy as well as security, right? I don't see the data leaving the pharma ecosystem or going outside of the pharma ecosystem, is point number one. The other is with respect to balancing privacy for the question around privacy and clinical data analysis, right? So, to some extent, this might be a reference to generative AI as well, which we'll discuss later. But overall, in order to train the algorithms, you do need to provide some access to your own data so that it can be fine-tuned further. Otherwise, what we're really seeing is the pharma stakeholders don't really have privacy on their minds for traditional data analytics use cases, or to some extent even advanced analytics use cases. But Madhur, what do you think?
Yeah, so I think Nisarg, that is correct. And the second thing is, it is the environment wherein you are operating your analytics model. So in most of the cases, pharma companies go for, if not public, but the hybrid kind of cloud model from this kind of platform providers, and they prefer to train this algorithm, train this AIML model into their server, the servers that pharma companies are using in order to look after the privacy and security part of the clinical data.
There's also another question from Jay, which is, real world evidence is big business nowadays. Do you see this accelerating with AI adoption?
Yeah, sure. So
Yeah,
go ahead,
Nisarg, go
Madhur.
on. Yeah, sure. So I wanted to just make one point here. So real world evidence is something which is an area of interest for most of the enterprises currently. So what they are doing is they are thinking around how they can, integrate EHR sources directly to the EDC. How can they make use of this EHR data for, say, your patient recruitment, protocol designing, and that is where we see AI playing its role. And we have seen a couple of interactions wherein enterprises are thinking about building this AIML model for protocol designing for patient recruitment using RWE, RWD that have been collected in the past.
Yeah, and just my 2 cents, right? Overall, my belief is that because of the increased or accelerated conversations around AI or Gen AI, we do see at least an increased interest on analytics, advanced analytics in general. So RWE being a category of it is also seeing increased adoption as these conversations increase. So the analogy to this is what COVID did to digital, generative AI is doing to analytics, if I may.
Yeah, and I would concur, right? Because if you look at a lot of these data and analytics platforms, even a lot of platforms that play in the DCT space, I think one thing that a lot of them are focusing on is how you bring all of the evidence that is generated, which is not captured in your traditional systems like in EDC. And with advanced analytics and AI, you do have greater ability to analyze that data. There's one more question around what kind of automation are you seeing? For example, macros to annotate data fields.
Madhu, do you want to take this first? I
Yeah.
can go after you.
Yeah. So, Jay, the automation part that you talked about, I think it's mostly about the data entry wherever it is applicable. So, consider your patient form wherein patients are kind of filling their data. It has to be auto-populated mechanism that has been implemented. When the operations are getting executed at the site level, the investigators should be able to perform its task in an automated format. So there we see a lot of ECRF form getting filled in an automated format, or the broader clinical development platforms such as EDC, CTMS, they are performing in an automated format. So there's a lot of automation that is happening, but at a broader level. And at a data level, we see some of the automations at data cleaning, data standardization, and even to some extent in data anonymization, wherein this automation using AIML is something which is kind of is an interest for most of these platform providers and demanded by the enterprises.
So, Madhu, since
And
you mentioned these platform providers, right? So, I think in your assessment, there were a few different types of players, right? So, you have what I would call some providers that specialize in providing data and analytics services and platforms. And there are CROs, there are service providers, there are large e-clinical providers, right? So, uh, the question to you is, are they bringing a different value proposition, or are they trying to bring the same thing but just from a different lens?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Junkie. So this space is definitely getting crowded, but the different categories of provider that you mentioned, they are approaching the entire idea of clinical data analytics in different ways. So the players who have clinical data analytics, data management platform, they offer a very comprehensive suite of services, end-to-end data management with a layer of robust analytics, AML capabilities focused on clinical value chain, and they show a good mix of revenue from their platform license fee as well as customization, more skewed towards large pharma clients. And they also have a good amount of partnerships in place, say for orchestration, data migration, implementation, deployment. So that's a one category of provider that I see. Next, you talked about CROs. So CROs are mostly using their superior clinical operations services due to years of experience in conducting trials. So they have an integrated approach in certain areas. So it can be into just data management or some bit of analytics and reporting dashboarding. Then there are some incumbents in this space, some of the large clinical technology providers who have already built their clinical development modules, and they are trying to ensure the ease of integration across these modules. So they are mostly taking a plug and play approach when it comes to clinical data management analytics. Then there are a few niche point solutions, niche trailblazer startups who are coming up in this space. They are coming up with very niche AIML expertise, AIML based solution targeted to very specific clinical use case. So those are 3-4 categories of provider that I see that are there in the space, there in the market. But one horizontal category that I see is around system integrator. So their major focus is on data management capabilities compared to analytics, and then major revenue is coming from services, say acting as orchestrator for implementing clinical D&A platform.
Got it. And there's one more question from Jay in the comments. Do you foresee big M&A in the clinical data and analytics space? I think I definitely see more M&A activity in this year than I think we've seen in the last year or two, right? And there are a few reasons for that. One, as Madhur talked about the different types of players, one of the things that we've noticed is some of the large e-clinical players don't have very mature capabilities in this area, right? And this would be one of the capabilities that they would be looking to add. They have, in fact, some of them have acquired capabilities around AI in the past, right? So uh, I think that this is data and analytics platforms is also something that they would be looking to acquire. The other is we are also coming from, uh, I would say, 2 years back where we saw high valuations, right? We are also now coming to those valuations becoming normalized, and those valuations becoming very favorable for an acquisition. So at least based on what I'm seeing and based on what I'm hearing, I do think that there will be more consolidation in this space. Nisarg, Madhur, anything different that you're seeing?
No, I wouldn't say there's anything different. In fact, we do expect more M&A activity or M&A activity to pick up this year, especially from the second half of this year, especially given your points around valuations and the need for a domain-specific approach to the traditional clinical data and analytics space. So I think that's overall our projection as well, and not just for the clinical data analytics space, but also for, say, the DCT space or the traditional product space, if I may as well.
There's a question from Srinivasan on use cases, but Srinivasan, we'll address that question maybe after 10 minutes. That's one of the things that we wanted to talk about. But before we talk about use cases, right? So we talked about why there's a need for data and analytics platforms. We also talked about who are the different actors in this space, right? Who are the different types of providers who are providing these platforms or solutions. Now if we change gears and talk about on the buy side, right? So, Nisarg, what do you think pharma is expecting from these when they think about clinical data and analytics platforms? What are some of the sourcing criteria that they use?
Sure. So, as you can see on this page, right, and this is derived from our conversations with 20 plus buyers who are currently using a platform for data and analytics. So, we see some nuances which are common across all the categories of pharma companies, but you will see some preferences for one parameter versus another. So, if I talk to you about the large pharma ecosystem, right? They focus a lot around customizability of the platform, so how they can customize an existing platform for their own requirements for maybe a particular therapeutic area, or integrated with their own, say, custom developed products or applications which might be very crucial for them. So customizability of the platform becomes very important in terms of how it will integrate in the long term with their own ecosystem for their own needs. The other is with respect to the domain expertise and the support services which a platform provider might offer. So when I refer to domain expertise over here, I think a lot of the use cases which fall under AI, ML, or generative AI lend themselves to the domain expertise equation. So how effectively a platform provider can enable a particular use case around AI, Gen AI in their environment, and what is the credibility of the team who can deploy it at a large scale setting. And then even beyond this, if there are specific nuances with respect to certain therapeutic areas, especially for rare disease oncology, a domain expertise equation becomes very important. I think one of the other facets of a domain expertise parameter is not just taking a technology led view for a challenge, but also how it may impact, say, the overall business side of things. So that's the domain and the support services equation. The third is around the entire capabilities of the platform, which Madhur mentioned earlier, right? So it should be robust enough to integrate across various data sources, manage or process the data, and then ultimately offer actionable insights for a particular set of stakeholders. So right from beginning to finish, how does the platform, or what are the capabilities of the platform from an end-to-end perspective? The fourth one, and also quite important, is the ease of use. So how the platform offers an intuitive user interface, and how easy it is for, say, a new user to learn the environment or take a low code no code approach for some of their own design requirements. And that is where, say, some of the UI UX components become very important. And finally, from a real time access, interoperable environment, and visibility perspective, so here we see a lot of the large pharma customers look at the kind of data sources they can integrate with, the platform can integrate with, also the kind of partnerships which a particular platform provider may have with, say, EDC providers, EHR or EMR providers, lab data providers, and all of the gamut of the ecosystem which usually exists in a traditional clinical trial. I think for the SMB pharma ecosystem, right, what I refer to as a small and medium pharma, some of these parameters change slightly. So, of course, we have ease of use and UI UX as one of the key parameters still. But I think what is also important to them is the total cost of ownership, and I'll talk about that in the next page. But till then, what I'll mention is that costs really are important for the SMB pharma ecosystem. They don't want to rip and replace everything in their environment, so they'll do with say a best of breed approach to whatever suits their requirements. The other is with respect to the configurability of the platform. So we've seen that there is a higher preference for COTS, deploying COTS products rather than customizing the platform for their own needs. So whatever is available in the platform itself is usually utilized for their own requirements. Integration capabilities, I think I already spoke about how effectively you can deploy and integrate with various sources of clinical data. And then one thing which you'll see different from from the large pharma parameters are there's a higher focus on data management and traditional analytics, which includes BI and dashboarding. We don't really see a higher focus around AI/ML capabilities for the SMB pharma at the moment, and this is usually coming from a Gen AI perspective. However, we do expect this to change as we go into, say, the 2020 end of 2024 and 2025 years. But I think this is broadly how the pharma companies are looking at when they think about their purchase decisions for a end-to-end clinical data and analytics platform or components of a data and analytics platform.
Thanks, Nisarg. And I think, yeah, for small and medium pharma, total cost of ownership and also how quickly you're able to deploy, right? The preference for costs, I think that is something that definitely comes through. Now, whenever we talk about platforms, right, there's always a question around an end-to-end approach versus best of breed capabilities. Now, from a
Yeah.
clinical data and analytics perspectives, what do you think is preference, or what do you think sponsors prefer?
Sure. So I think there are two tenets or two sides of this question, right? What is the preference and what is currently being deployed, right? So if you look at the following slide on the screen, right? So in our conversations with buyers, we ask them what is their preference for, say, deployment. So over here, you'll see that almost 70% of the stakeholders we interviewed preferred an end-to-end approach versus a best of breed approach. But I think the on-ground reality is slightly different. You will see that the actual deployments are happening, say, more for a best of breed approach right now compared to end-to-end approach. So we do expect a shift to happen in the near term. And one of the reasons why you will see, say, a higher preference for end-to-end platforms approach is to be honest, there are lesser providers to manage and therefore lesser number of integrations and therefore a smoother interface and a smoother experience. And then, of course, because everything becomes easier, the expectation is that also the total cost of ownership of an end-to-end platform when you compare it to say multiple point solutions in a similar approach is slightly lower. However, the reason why we still see pharma companies, especially the SMB pharma companies, deploying a best of breed approach is because a true end-to-end implementation across multiple therapeutic areas can get quite costly, and I think the deal times also are quite high. So we have seen platform providers mention of or lead times go up to even 2 to 3 years for an end-to-end deployment. So usually we've seen that farmers may usually start off small and then scale once they see success in particular value chains or use case areas. So I think that's our initial read of the market, but we do see a higher preference for an end-to-end platform deployment approach in the coming few years. And I think we're already seeing something similar happen in the say EDC, CTMS, or the reg safety environments where pharma companies are thinking about an end-to-end approach because of the benefits which it has to offer.
And you think this is following a similar trend where sponsors want an end-to-end approach, but right now, maybe because of how the supply ecosystem is, maybe there are not a lot of end-to-end options, or maybe there's not enough maturity, that currently the adoption is more best of breed, but the desire is to go more towards an end-to-end platform.
Yes, correct. So overall, I think platform maturities as they become more streamlined and also fit for purpose across, say, the clinical, regulatory, quality, safety value chains, that's where we see a higher uptick or interest for an end-to-end deployment approach.
Makes sense. Now, I think there were some questions around use cases, right? So maybe let's address those. So, Madhur, when you assessed clinical data and analytics platforms across clinical trials, regulatory, safety, quality, uh, did was the adoption of data and analytics platforms as well as what use cases they were addressing, was it more uniform, or you see more adoption in certain areas versus others?
That's an interesting question, Janki. So, in my opinion, the entire clinical trial value chain, right from your trial design and startup to the regulatory and safety stage, clinical data management is something which is integral throughout. However, if we talk about analytics in specific areas like your trial design, execution, when the study is actually live, these are some of the areas which see maximum adoption as most of the raw clinical data gets generated at the start and the earlier stages of clinical trial. And also, this data is very dynamic and gets stored and handled across multiple systems. And that's why creating that visibility, tracking the performance become more important for various stakeholders when it comes to clinical data analytics and management.
So you mentioned that you see more use cases around, or more adoption around trial design, startup, conduct, and closeout. But and I also see some of the use cases mentioned here, right? So maybe talk us through some of the use cases that you think are seeing more widespread adoption compared to others.
Yeah, so I'll again start from the first stage of clinical trial, which is trial design and startup. It's important to understand what are the expectations that pharma or the sponsors have at this stage. So sponsors are mainly concerned about the trial feasibility to understand what are going to be the outcomes of this particular assessment. They want to understand a realistic patient population from the EHR, EMR data, and want to understand and assess the feasibility of eligible patient to meet the specific inclusion exclusion criteria. So these are some of the broader expectations that pharma enterprises have, and through which they want to kind of save time, save cost, and accelerate patient recruitment, faster the site selection process. So efficient patient recruitment, protocol design, feasibility assessment are some of the most prominent use cases when it comes to trial design and startup. If we talk about trial conduct and when the study is actually live, a lot of data that gets generated and integrated into various applications. Here the platform should perform your data standardization, data standardizing deliverables, automating those deliverables. So those kind of SDTM formatting, ADAM formats, all these kind of formats and data standards have to be maintained. So here analyzing the data in real time to detect any anomalies in the data, deviation in medication adherence, or some of the other analytics based use cases are the areas where platforms are expected to perform as per the demand side. And when it comes to regulatory aspect, I think platform should be able to work in a compliant and audit ready environment to write those analysis codes that are required. And what is happening currently is while submitting the data to regulatory authorities, most of these pharma enterprises send an old school PDF to the regulatory bodies. So enabling efficient electronic transfer of such data with compliance in place is one area when it comes to regulatory that is enabled by such kind of platform. And similarly, if we look at safety and quality aspect, risk based quality management, safety process or optimization are some of the crucial areas that see sponsors demand for clinical data analytics platform.
So, Madhur, in my conversations, whenever I'm talking about clinical data and analytics, right, there are a lot of questions around things such as RBQM. Do you see this as, let's say, an emerging use case, emerging but maybe high growth use case? Any perspective that you can share on that?
Yeah. So interestingly, Chunky, RBQM is I would not call it as a use case, but an area altogether. There are a couple of applications of RBQM that can be built by this platform provider. So RBQM is seeing traction as industry is witnessing rapid surge in clinical data. If we look at the year of say 2005 to 2015, there has been dramatic increase in several procedures prescribed per patient for collecting data. So I think the number was close to around 65 to 70%, if I remember it correctly. And I think considering all the fundamental data challenges faced by the industry in the previous decade and decade before that, FDA, EMEA published a guidance paper recommending adoption of RBM, risk-based monitoring. There were not a lot of quality design elements which were included in that guidance paper, but the fundamental principles around say the need for RBM system in clinical trials were laid out. And since then we see the evolution of RBM system, which is risk based monitoring system, to RBQM, which is risk based quality management system, with the incorporation of a lot of quality by design aspects into it, which eventually aim to mitigate the operational risk. So you see platforms offering various key risk indicators, various quality tolerance limits, which are custom designed as per sponsors' requirement. And yes, that is why we see RBKM is one of the emerging areas that will be sourced in conjunction with clinical data analytics platform in the future.
There are a couple of questions on data observability. So whether data observability solution will add value to the clinical data management and clinical trial analytics. Nisarg or
Yeah.
Madhur, anyone of you wants to talk
Yeah,
about?
maybe I
Go ahead,
can
Madhur.
take a stab at it. Yeah. So the question is around data observability. The area that I mentioned earlier, it's about RBQM, which is risk-based quality management. It's mostly on the similar lines. The kind of use cases or application that we can unlock using data observability is, I think, around data quality assurance, wherein ensuring the accuracy, completeness, and consistency of clinical data is very important. Next, I think detecting the issues earlier. So by proactively monitoring these data pipelines, data observability tools can detect the issues earlier. And lastly, I think once if you have this consistent monitoring in place, the compliance and regulatory requirements can also be taken care of.
We have a question from Jay Chandran on Gen AI, and we'll move to that in a little bit. Uh, there's also a question around is talent availability an issue with the clients that you're speaking with? Maybe I'll share some quick perspectives, then I'll invite both of you to add. I think where there's a challenge is talent which is skilled on both domain, so clinical trials as well as technology. I think that is what organizations find difficult. And even if you look at a lot of these platform providers, there are a lot of these platform providers who have excellent capabilities in advanced analytics and advanced AI. But I think there are uh, when it comes to having those capabilities and also understanding of clinical trials, I think that is where some of them fall short. And my hypothesis is that from a talent perspective, what you will find difficult is this is the part that you'll find difficult. Someone who's very good at AI and advanced analytics at the same time also understands clinical trials very in a lot of depth. Nisarg, Madhur, anything that you would want to add?
Yeah, I think if we think about talent, right, and there is the product provider ecosystem and the IT service provider ecosystem as well. And especially for this area, we see both competing for the similar set of talents. I'm not talking about the product engineering or the product management areas, but the areas like uh, so AI solutioning or the AI services, right, where you might have to take a domain specific approach for your own products. So that's where we see both service providers and product providers trying to fight for the same talent. And that's where talent availability also may become a concern. But that's more from a supply perspective. From a domain perspective or from a demand perspective, if I may, right? Pharma companies still the when I speak to clients or pharma companies, they still mention that product providers could do better on the domain solutioning part, or how a particular platform can really address their business needs. So it does stem from a limited domain expertise in house for a few of the providers as well.
Just one more question before we go to Gen AI. So, and maybe I can take this up, right? So the question is that a lot of biotechs are struggling. Do you see a better second half and beyond for analytics firms that focus on these companies? I think the short answer is yes. Uh, in our view of how we see this industry, we think that the first couple of quarters or first half of this year is we're not going to see a lot of growth. From the second half of this year is when we actually expect growth to pick up, and that's the same case for clinical data and analytics providers. It's the same is the case with biotechs as well. If you look at biotech funding, 2023 was one of the lowest years in terms of funding, and we expect the first half of 2024 to be very similar, but we do expect greater funding activity in the second half of the year. So the providers that serve these companies will naturally also see an uplift in their growth in the second half of the year as well. So let's move to Gen AI, right? Because as you also mentioned, Nisar, from coming from Scope, that was also one of the hot topics that people wanted to, or people were talking about. And we have a question
Yeah.
from Jay Chandran that can Gen AI solve the site selection, site feasibility process for new studies?
Sure. So I think before I answer that, I just wanted to give my 2 cents on Gen AI as a technology, right? So overall, there is a lot of there are a lot of questions, and pharma companies are looking at generative AI as a potential technology which can solve for some of their challenges. The Now, the question is whether we see Gen AI really scaling as per the rate of conversations we are having, right? And the answer to that is no. I think to some extent, we really see a lot of proof of concepts, but almost 85-90% of them aren't really seeing the light of day because of a couple of reasons, right? The first one is there are scalability challenges. Pharma companies are asking about the ROI for the use cases. Do I really need a generative AI algorithm to help me with a use case, which I can probably do with a normal analytics use case or a advanced analytics use case? So, do I really need a generative AI use case for this? And the second is, what kind of ROI benefits can you promise me if I was to scale this to a phase 3 trial or a large scale trial, if I may? So, unless product providers aren't able to promise at least 3x 4x benefits on their generative AI use cases, it's difficult for those to scale, because then we realize that compute costs as well as the cloud costs really increase for those use cases. So I think those are a few challenges, and of course there's the trust, safety, the hallucinations, and all of those explainability challenges which also come into the mix. So if I was to now answer Jay's question, right, can Gen AI solve the site selection, site feasibility process for new studies? The question is, it can, but the question also is, do you all can it also not be solved through a traditional analytics use case or through an RWE analytics use cases as well? So that is where you'll see pharma companies ask you that question. And then what is the ROI around a generative AI use case? So we have seen generative AI use cases really fly in areas which are focused around automating. I think there was a question before as well, right? Annotating data or de-anonymizing data or all of those use cases. But I think for some of the areas where access to data might be a challenge, or where a lot of the data is coming from internal secret source, that's when a product provider might have, say, challenges training a particular algorithm. So, Jay, to a short answer to your question is, it can, but it depends, which is a traditional answer, if I may.
So what Nisar, what you're saying is yes, Gen AI can solve it, but the question is, do you really need Gen AI for this? Right? Can you not do this through existing technologies, analytics, or AI, which is already available? And
Correct.
I would agree with you, right? I think this is one use case where I feel the existing technologies should suffice. I think this is an area where you will struggle to demonstrate return on investments for using Gen AI for this area.
Correct. Yeah, and to be honest, that's where most of the proof of concepts, while they start off with the intent of, delivering ROI, reducing the number of people, say, involved in a particular process, or, maybe doing something which is groundbreaking. But I think what they really see challenges around is like the data. One is limited data to train the algorithm, and therefore data biases, hallucinations also creep into the way. So ultimately, they still need a human in the loop, which in certain cases might increase the total cost of implementation rather than really reduce it. So that's where the real struggle lies. That the technology truly and really has a lot of potential, but it just needs to find the right use cases, especially in clinical development, which has a greater amount of regulatory scrutiny. And usually, we all know that pharma companies are fast adopters, but or fast followers, but not early adopters, right? So that's where they'll take a trust and safety approach, and a trust and safety lens, if I may, to a lot of the use cases which might be pitched to them during solutioning.
So while you were saying that, Mr. One, I think that thing which struck to me is that there are a lot of use cases for analytics, automation, AI, right? And there would be questions around should we use or can we use Gen AI for this? How do you think sponsors as well as product and platform or service providers should how should they think about this? How should they prioritize which are the use cases? Because you mentioned 90% of the use cases don't see the light of the day, they don't move to production. What is
Yeah.
your advice on how to identify those use cases which have a higher likelihood of moving to production?
Correct. So I usually think about four key parameters for evaluating various generative AI use cases, right? And all of them have different sub parameters as well. But the first, the biggest parameter which a lot of the pharma companies are looking to solve for is the explainability parameter. So you can have areas like hallucinations, deepfakes, or reliability of output included over here. So if you're able to, if your generative AI use case is able to, work around most of these challenges, then of course there's a higher potential to scale it. The second parameter is with respect to the data security and privacy concerns. So will implementing a generative AI use case cause my own internal data to probably go out of my landscape? Or if a particular generative AI algorithm is being used to, if my data is being used to train a particular generative AI algorithm, and then it might probably benefit someone else as well, then there are some reservations over there too when it is secret source. The third is with respect to the ownership and responsibility in terms of who owns the output or who is accountable for, say, an output which might not really be the best in class output, if I may. So I think there are a couple of examples out there, not in the pharma industry, but others where, say, an unrealistic output was produced and an unsuspecting user really used it in their work, right? And then led to complications downstream. So how do you manage for that? And to some extent, the last is around bias and ethicality. What are the chances of a biased output and an unethical output or unethical response, if at all? And that really gets pharma companies worried a lot, because if you expose these algorithms to stakeholders like patients and sites, then the potential for downside is way more than the potential for upside, at least at this moment. So if you are able to evaluate your generative AI use cases on these four broad parameters, And if you're able to showcase output or a use case which gets a lot of ticks across most of these sub parameters, then I think those are the use cases which will really see light of the day. And which is why I mentioned, right, a lot of use cases focused around anonymizing data, automating a few data flows, or regulatory document creation, etc., which are seemingly low hanging fruits. They are the ones which are getting prioritized because of potential cost savings down the line.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I would probably add a couple of more things as well, right? So we talked about return on investment. So I think cost is also a big parameter. And I don't think a
Yeah.
lot of sponsors have a good way of measuring that, right? And I think that is one of the reasons why a lot of those pilots don't move to production. And I think the other is it probabilistic versus is it deterministic, right? I think that also would uh, or that would also be important to whether you need Gen AI or whether this can be solved through AI and analytics. We have one more question from Jay. So, are you seeing clients expressing the difficulty of getting trial sites with the right infra? I would say, based on my conversations, yes. And I think one of the, or uh, from a site perspective, right, we often hear about challenges in terms of too much technology that they have to deal with, particularly now that they're also collecting data directly from patients. So I, I think as it is, a lot of independent sites find it very difficult to again just keep the lights on. But I think with some of or with more technology getting into the picture, I think this is only going to increase. Madhur or Nisarg, anyone wants to do? Either of you want to add anything to it?
Yeah, Madhu, why don't you take a shot? I'll follow you.
Yeah, so Nisar, Chunky, as you pointed out, things around infrastructure that is required for sites operationalization. I see couple of sites struggling with advanced medical facilities, specialized equipments that are required for running these trials with an incorporation of advanced technology. So even if you take an example of data analytics platform or DCT platform, there are a lot of nuances around technology, the knowledge of operationalizing that technology, and then eventually integrating that technology into sites environment. This takes a lot of understanding around mobilizing few elements, operationalizing couple of aspects of this technology, and then getting into the operations part. So I do see sites facing challenges in terms of infrastructure with respect to getting a hang of technology in terms of operationalizing the data technology by having an adequate knowledge how to do that, and then using it in a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, and if I may add, right, I think every sponsor might have their own requirements around sites deploying or adopting their specific platforms, right? But if you really think about it from a site's perspective, at the end of the day, they might have to work across, say, 10 to 15 different products for maybe different processes or use cases. So that also adds a lot to their own infra challenges, which I think the industry is trying to solve for at the moment, but has not yet.
So I think we've covered all that we wanted to and we've addressed all of the questions. Maybe just one last question to Madhur, right? So you ran this assessment last year. What are your plans for this year?
Yeah, I think what I observed during that assessment is this space is growing rapidly. Platform providers are innovating a lot in this space, be it in terms of say user experience, the way stakeholders are interacting with the technology. So bringing in a lot of low code, no code nuances, bringing in a lot of configurability into their platform. Then things around the custom use cases that are demanded by enterprises nowadays. So they are building a lot more accelerators on top of existing analytics layer. So that is something which will be an interest for enterprises going ahead. So these are the two areas that I see taking some sort of an investment also from these platform providers, and there is a growing interest from enterprises as well.
So do you plan to do a rerun of the assessment?
Probably yes.
Okay, good. I think that's it, right? That's it from us. Thanks everyone for joining in. If you would like, if you're interested in the research that Madhur led, please feel free to download the complimentary abstract of the clinical life sciences clinical data and analytics platform Speak Matrix Assessment. Thanks everyone for joining in. Have a nice rest of the day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.